Okay, I'm going to be talking about statistical notation. Hopefully after we go through this, you'll get the idea of how this all works. And statistical notation is really just a way to represent a lot of data in an equation form. And we'll be coming across a lot of equations, and you should just know how to do it. A big part of it is order of operations, but also it sometimes involves knowing what subscripts, the little things below the numbers, or even superscripts when little things above the number or the x, what those things mean. So data, when we set it up, kind of looks like this right here, this table. And I have an ID for each one. So each row represents a different person or case, right? And each column represents a different variable. So my first variable is just a student ID, and this is what I use to tie them all together. It's always good to record these things. You don't want to use names because you don't want somebody else to come across here and say, oh, this is Jim Smith. You want it to be anonymous, so we usually use some random student ID numbers. The next variable is the individual or the person or case number, and this I would use for sorting and things like that, and this means I equals 1 here, meaning that I'm talking about the first person, second person, third person, fourth. Then I have two scores, an X score and a Y score, and we'll say that this is a score on quiz number 1, and this is a score on quiz number 2. Now, if I'm looking at the subscripts, and I say I want X sub I, that means I'm talking about the X value for the ith person. So X sub 3, in this case right here, means that I'm talking about the X score of the third person. So my I is 3, I'm in this column right here. Oops. My X score is 9, so I am looking at this value right here. So X sub 3 means number 9, or a value of 9. Y sub 6, on the other hand, means I'm looking in my Y variable at the sixth person. So I go in this row in this column and I find it's a value of 8. Okay? Now the total number of observations, or N as we're going to call it, number of people or number of observations, we label capital N when we're talking about populations really, and small n when we're talking about samples, at least for now. We have 8 students in this case, so N is just the number of observations or individuals that I have. And I have 8 people, so N equals 8 in this case. Now, summation is this little sigma sign. It's backwards 3, or it looks like a weird E. But it really just means that I'm summing across a whole bunch of stuff. So sum of x means that I want to add up all my x's. So if I say sum of x, I'm just going to add 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10 plus 6 plus 7 plus 9 plus 5 and get a sum. And that's what we have going on right here. So sum of x equals x1 plus x2 all the way up to as many x's as I would have. And so that's 7 plus 8 plus dot 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 comes to 61. And I can write it like this as well. And what this says is I want to sum all my x's starting at 1 and going all the way to the n. That's what this n means. Sometimes I only want to look at a range of cases. Now in this case, when I look down here, I'd be saying I want to sum x starting at the third person and going to the sixth person. We won't be doing anything like this in the class actually, but I just want you to know it and have something to say about it if you ever come across it, because it is pretty common. If I don't have any of these symbols, then I'm just meaning to sum all the x's or all the y's or whatever. Okay? Now, as far as then using these ideas to really read equations, right? I have my x variable here, I have my y variable here, and I have a bunch of equations down here, and I have the answers right here as well. The order of operations is right up here. make sure you know these things. If you get these out of order, if you don't have a good handle on this, practice it over and over and over until it becomes second nature, because we'll be using this stuff a lot. And if you misread things, you're going to make a lot of mistakes that could be avoided. So make sure you practice these things. The first thing you do is do things in parentheses. So anytime you see parentheses, that's the first thing you do. Then you look for any exponents, squared, cubed, or whatever. Then do those. Then you multiply and divide. Then you do summation, and then you add and subtract. And now these are the three kind of major steps. The multiplying and dividing are both can be done. Multiply first, then divide, or divide then multiply. It doesn't really matter. Then summation, then add and subtract. And this is where people get these things confused a lot. Make sure you follow in these orders. So to do this, I have the answers posted right here, but we're just going to go through them in an Excel sheet based on these variables and these equations. So what I have here, and we'll be using Excel this next week, I have my X values, I have my Y values. Let me just make sure that those are the same. 3, 2, 5, 4, 1, 4. Okay, good. And the first one that I have is sum of x squared. Now, if I think of my order of operations, I don't have any parentheses, so I'm okay there. Next thing I do is exponents, right? So squaring. Now, what this says is that I have to square each x value. So what I'm going to have over here is my new x column, only it's going to be my x squared column. Okay? And what this is, it's just going to equal 3 squared. And 3 times 3 is 9, 2 times 2 is 4, 5 times 5 is 25, 4 times 4 is 6. And then I'm going to sum these up right here. And that adds up to 54. So my answer for this is 54. And again, first I square all my x's, then I add them up. In the next case, it's the opposite thing, because I have parentheses, and I have parentheses around the summation. So first I'm going to add up all my x's, right? And get rid of these guys. So I'm going to add all these up. And I get 14, and then I'm going to square it. So this is going to equal 14 squared, which is 196. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, first I add all my x's, I get 14, then I square that sum. Now in this next one, what I'm going to do is first I'm going to sum all my x's, then I'm going to sum all my y's, then I'm going to multiply them together. Okay, so I already have this one summed up. If I add 1 plus 4 plus 2 plus 3, I get 10, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the sum of all my x's times the sum of all my y's. So equals this times this gives me 140. Hopefully that makes sense so far. Now in this next case, I have sum of xy. Now what this means is that, remember my order of operations, no parentheses, no exponents. Next thing is multiplying and dividing. Well, I have a multiplication thing here, x times y. So this is going to be, instead of x squared now, it's going to be x times y. And I represent the times with a star. I'm not sure how used to that people are, but that's a common symbol. I wasn't familiar with it my whole life, but it's pretty common. So this first one is this first xy pair right here is going to be equal to 3 times, where is it, times 1. And when you look at these cells, it says B2 times C2. I'm just telling it which cell to look in. So this is cell B2, this is cell C2. My YX pair is going to, in this case, be 3 times 1. It's going to equal 3. Now, instead of typing that in over and over, I can just drag on this. And if you look at how this changes right here, it's B2 times C2, B3 times C3, B4 times C4, and B5 times C5. This comes in really handy when you have a ton of stuff to look at. And then I'm just going to say that this equals the sum of all those, and that gives me a value of 33. Now in the next one, again, I'm looking at my order of operations. In this case, I do have, I don't have any parentheses, but I do have exponents. So again, I'm going to be making my little x squared. And that's the first thing I do. So again, this is 9, 4, 25, 4. Then I look, I don't have anything to multiply or divide. I do have a summation, so I do want to add all these up. Oops. Should be 16 here. Hold on. It should be 16. Now I can sum them all up. And I get a value of 54. Again, the first thing I did, oops. Now what I wanted, the final thing I have to do to that is add 4. So 54 plus 4 equals 54 plus 4 equals 58. Got a little ahead of myself there. So exciting, I can't help myself, you know. The last one is sum of x minus 2 squared. Now looking at this one, and this is a format we're going to use a lot, so make sure you really understand how to do this one that I'm talking about right here. First thing we do is what's in parentheses, right? So I look at what's in parentheses, x minus 2. So I'm going to subtract 2 from each x. So this equals 3 minus 2. I'm going to also have 2 minus 2, 0. 5 minus 2 is 3. 4 minus 2 is 2. Okay? So I have all these different values. Now, my next thing I do is I have an exponent. So I'm going to square all these. Equals this squared. And 1 squared is 1, 0 squared is 0, 3 squared is 9, and 2 squared is 4. Now once I have that, my last step is to add them all up. And I get a value of 14. So hopefully all this makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know. We have some more to go through just with x's in this case. In this case, right, sum of x means I'm just adding up all my x's. 5 plus 2 is 7, plus 1 is 8, plus 4 is 12. My answer here is 12. The next is sum of x squared. So again, because I have exponents first, the first thing I'm going to do is square each x. And then I'm going to add it all up. And I get a value of 46. This next one here, sum of x squared, but I have parentheses around that sum of x. And so I'm going to first add up all my x's, which gives me 10. Or not 10, 12, sorry. And, whoops, I don't want to get that out of there. So I get 12, and then I square 12, and I get 144. So 5 plus 2 plus 1 plus 4 equals 12. I square that, and I get 144. The next one I have sum of x minus 1. Well, I do what's in parentheses first, right? So in this case, 5 minus 1 is 4. And up here I can put x minus 1 is what this represents. 2 minus 1 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. And 4 minus 1 is 3. Then I add all those things up. 4 plus 1 plus 0 plus 3 equals 8. So my answer is 8. Then I have sum of x minus 1 squared. Now in this case again, right, I have my x minus 1, it's in parentheses, it's the first thing I do. But then I have this exponent, so I have to square each one. This becomes 16, this becomes 1, this becomes 0, this becomes 9. I add them all up, and I get 26. If you have a calculator, that's great. If you have a little smartphone that has like a little Excel on it and you want to use that, that's great. Otherwise, you know, use whatever you want to do these things, but this is the basic procedure. And, you know, this is going to be a part of how we represent things. And we'll be looking at these equations, and we're talking about them a little bit and trying to ask ourselves, well, why would we represent, this idea with this equation? And staring at equations doesn't sound like a lot of fun, and I'll be honest, at first it isn't fun at all. It's pretty boring. But as you think about things and as you kind of get familiar with some stuff, it is interesting to see how things get represented mathematically, and people have their reasons, and you may agree with it or you may disagree with it, but it's something interesting to think about. So if you have any questions about this stuff, let me know. I will be posting this stuff online in just a minute, so it should be available. It's Thursday night. I hope to get this up earlier, but I thought I had today free, but I didn't. So I'm getting it up as soon as I can. Hopefully you haven't forgotten everything we talked about last night. All right.